All right, Judges 14. Steve, leave. Hey, Steve, the chalkboard's already cleaned for Friday night. I already got the chalkboard cleaned for Friday night. It's in that room back there. It's locked up in the change room. And I'll get you chalk and okay, sure. But I've got chalk and got it cleaned up and all. So you're good to go. Yeah, it was. That's what made me think. All right, Judges 14 is where we are. Anybody got anything they want to add? Not yet. I'm finished. I'm going home. Oh, that would be terrible, wouldn't it? We're glad that you're here. Glad to see you. In Judges 13, we saw, of course, the angel of the Lord that basically came to Manoah and came to his wife and said that they were going to have a son. His name was Samson. Samson was born, of course, but it was interesting because the mother had a Nazirite vow for during the pregnancy, but Samson was to have the Nazirite vow for all of his life. We talked a little bit about the Nazirite vow last week. We talked about how that it was a vow that you find in the book of Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter. It's really a vow of consecration. It usually lasts about a week from the standpoint of the ceremony and the vow itself, the extension of the vow. But for Samson, it was supposed to last all of his life, which meant what? Well, it meant couldn't touch things regards to blood, couldn't touch anything that was dead, and eat and drink certain things, a certain diet. But also for Samson, what else could he not do? Cut his hair, right? And ultimately, that's where his strength, as we know the story, we're not there, but we know the story. That's where his strength really laid in God. And so we'll look at that when we get to the 16th chapter. But it had to say that Samson is a Bible story that's told so often, preached on, and preachers do a wonderful job with it, and Bible school teachers do too. Don't get me wrong, but Samson wasn't really a God-fearing person. God was with him and God used him, but he wasn't much on God because he really wasn't much on the Nazirite vow that he was supposed to keep. And we see that again this evening. In the 14th chapter, Samson wants to take a wife from Timnah. Timnah was considered a Philistine or a heathen land, Philistine land, but a heathen land. And so he should not, as an Israelite, he should not have taken her. But that's who he wanted, and that's who he made his father go and get. And then we saw the story last week as we were closing out. We really saw that Samson, he went, and according to verse 5 and verse 6, he kills a young lion. And then he comes back later, and there are bees. There's a swarm of bees in that carcass. There's honey. He eats of that. Forbidden, nevertheless, forbidden from the standpoint if he's touching a dead carcass. Therefore, he's violating his Nazirite vow again. But then there's a feast that's thrown, banquet feast, if you will, a marriage feast, or he and this lady, this girl from Timnah that he wants. And we saw that in verse 10 as we closed it out. There were 30 companions that were invited. And then we began in verse 12 of the 14th chapter. That gets us to where we are tonight. Samson said to them, to these 30 companions, "Let me pose a riddle to you. If you correctly solve and explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast, then I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you will give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing." And they said to him, "Pose your riddle that we may hear it." So it's sort of a contest. these 30 companions, these 30 individuals that have come to this feast, he poses a problem. He says, okay, if you can answer my riddle, I'll give you 30 changes of clothes. If not, you give me 30 changes of clothes. He's confident in himself. I mean, people that make wagers like this, they're confident in themselves. They're betting on themselves. And he's betting on himself that the fact that they can't answer the riddle that he is going to propose to them. And so his riddle is simple. Verse 14, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Now, I'm not good at riddles. I never have been. It's sort of like, do you remember when you had these pictures and it was looking for Waldo, and you had to, my wife would say, you got to almost let your eyes go cross-eyed in order to find them. And I said, there's your problem. And she would say, what do you mean? I said, I am a person that sees things as they are. I was trained to do that. And I said, I see things as they are, as they're real. And I said, my mama said, don't let your eyes go cross because they won't come back straight. And so I can't see those things. But I said, I can see all those little individual things. Well, that's sort of like a riddle. I'm not good at riddles. Why? Because I'm more of a straightforward guy. And riddles don't intrigue me that much. I guess maybe that's why I can't answer them. Don't try. But his riddle seems to be straightforward because we already know the answer. But he poses this riddle, and there are 3 days that they could not explain the riddle. Now, the feast would have gone on for 7 days. Like I say, it's sort of the precursor now to what we call a rehearsal dinner. Rehearsal dinner, is the night before the wedding usually. Well, their feast lasted for 7 days. And so he posed this riddle, and now for 3 days they couldn't explain it. But verse 15 says, but it came to pass on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, entice. The word entice there is the idea of deceive or to allure from the standpoint of persuading him. Persuade your husband that he may explain the riddle to us, or else we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us in order to take what is ours? Is that not so? So here's something to consider. There's a few interesting, for lack of a better term, I'm just going to say words. That's not the correct word, but themes maybe that come up in this few little chapters. Think about how often fire is mentioned with Samson. But the fire that is mentioned here is a threat. These 30 companions say, you persuade, you allure, you do whatever you have to. You entice your husband to tell us the answer to the riddle, or we're going to burn you. We're going to set you on fire. We're going to set you and your father's house on fire because we think the whole reason you invited us was a trap, a trick. You wanted us to be such that took what was ours. You took the 30 garments that was ours. Samson's wife wept on him and said, you only hate me. You do not love me. You've posed a riddle to the sons of my people, but you have not explained it to me. Verse 16. It's not that she wept once or that she wept a little bit. It's the idea of she continuously just kept weeping. The floodgates opened. Tammy Faye Bakker has nothing on this lady. I mean, she is just bawling. And you have to ask yourself, if you just stop right here, don't read any further. You have to stop and ask yourself, how much of this that she's asking is based on nationalism, and how much of it is based on the threat? In other words, is she really wanting to get an answer from Samson in order that she might tell these people because they are her people, as she calls them? Or is it because of the threat? I don't know that there's a real 100% answer for that. But that's a thing that comes up again a little later in this book, in the story of Samson, rather, I should say. But it's something to think about. So she's crying and she's wanting to know, she's wanting it explained. And he said to her, look, I've not explained it to my father or my mother, so should I explain it to you? In other words, I haven't talked to the folks that are closest to me. I haven't talked to my mother. I haven't talked to my father. I haven't told them. But she wept on him the 7 days while the feast lasted. It seems as if by this verse that she cried the whole 7 days. And as she's crying, though, it's not until the third day that the riddle is posed, and the seventh day, or excuse me, 3 days that they're trying to explain it. The seventh day that they come to her and threaten her with the idea of we want the answer. But anyway, she wept for 7 days while the feast lasted. Now, as I said, this was, you got to understand something too. This was the precursor to the modern day rehearsal dinner. This was a feast that lasted 7 days. And on the seventh day, that's when the marriage itself was consummated. Not until then. And so she's been weeping, and the feast is lasting, and it happened on the seventh day that he told her, because she pressed him so much. He got tired of hearing her cry. And so he told her the answer. Then she explained the riddle to the sons of her people, to her kinfolks, if you will. So the men of the city said to him on the seventh day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you'd not plowed with my heifer. Boy, this is don't do this at home. Don't say this to your wife. This is not acceptable. But let me give you some background that shows you the value of the answer. Let's read the answer. If you have not plowed, the heifer that Samson is talking about is a very valuable animal. The heifer is a cow, if you will, that has not yet had a calf. And in that day, for those people, this was a very valuable animal. So he is really, we look at it as a kind of a put down, but he's really elevating her. He says, if you've not messed with my wife, you've not messed with my prized wife, my prized, I'm going to use the word possession, but I don't mean it from the standpoint of a wife, but if you, the one that I love, if you had not messed with her, you would not have solved the riddle. It's kind of interesting because it almost seems as if he's telling them in some ways, you played unfair. You've gone for an answer not based upon sitting down and talking about it and coming up with an answer. You've cheated. And so the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon, killed 30 of their men, took their apparel, and gave the changes of clothing to those who had explained the riddle. So his anger was aroused, and he went back up to his father's house. And Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. We'll see in the next chapter, the father-in-law talks about giving her to somebody else, giving her to a companion. Now, Samson, if he's heard her cry for 7 days, he might have been glad to get rid of her. But not really, because you see in the next chapter, there's some more to this story, this last verse, 2 verses, that helps us out. But think about, instead of thinking about her and her situation, think about the strength of Samson, but also think about not only the strength of Samson, but think about the anger of Samson. So instead of him giving, if you will, 30 garments, going out and taking his money, his possessions, and buying the 30 changes of clothes, he's mad. He's mad. It says that his anger was great. It was aroused. And so what does he do? Well, he goes out to Ashkelon. Ashkelon, from where he was, is about 20 miles towards the coast. It's actually, if you look at a map, a biblical map of that day and age, Ashkelon was a coastal city. And so he had to travel about 20 miles from where he was. And so that would be a day's journey. Now, we don't know, did he go a day at the end of the day, kill all of these people, or did he go and wait and then kill them the next day? It doesn't say. It's not important. But nevertheless, he goes and he kills these 30 men, and he gets the changes of clothing, gives them to the individuals that have answered his riddle. And I want to say verse 20, if you don't mind. You can look at it, read it, understand it, but I want to use it in the next chapter. I wrote a note here. I said, is this really a good gift? Stolen items. You stop and think about it. He's gone, and by might, he's gotten what he wanted, and he didn't really put out for it, except, if you will, the effort that it took to travel to Ashkelon and kill these 30 people. Well, what do we learn? What do we learn in this chapter? We learn several things. We learn, first of all, that you need to have the right priorities. And in the first part of the chapter, Samson didn't. Samson's priority was, I've found a woman. I like her. She's evidently probably pretty. She fills whatever desires he has, and that's who I want. It didn't matter that she was what would have been considered by law a forbidden woman. I want what I want, and I'm going to get what I want. So we need to have the right priorities, really. We should listen to what God says, what God wants, what God desires, and not what we want. Physical strength does not equal spiritual strength. Samson had great physical strength, but he didn't care. He didn't care about killing people. He didn't care about anybody. He had physical, and we'll see that later on in the next chapter. But he has great physical strength. But his spiritual strength is not there. He is, as we said last week, he is the weakest strong man that seemingly ever was. Next, be careful who you trust. He trusted his wife. Well, she wasn't his wife from the standpoint of a consummated marriage. That hadn't happened yet. That's how she was able to be given to his companion, to his best man. But he trusted her. He was willing to tell her the answer. Now, he probably didn't know that she'd been threatened, her life, her and her family. He probably didn't know that. But yet, at the same point in time, too, he trusted her, and she betrayed that trust. Jerry, I kind of wish Jerry was here. He came by this morning, just running through. A whole different story. Anyway, I wasn't expecting. But anyway, in the third Monday workshop that Jerry started 30 years ago, I guess, in this area, that we meet at different congregations, we have a 50-minute session that is basically, you can bring up anything that's going on with you that you feel comfortable talking about. And we've talked about a lot of situations, talked about a lot of elders, but we talked about a lot of members, a lot of situations in churches, things going on. Talked about some families and some family heartache, hurts that preachers have had, and things of that nature. But we have rules. I know you can't believe that with Jerry. But one of the rules is confidentiality. And Jerry always talks about, I would be very careful. And I would, if I were you, want to see those, especially that maybe are there for the first time, you might want to wait to make sure you can trust us. That trust is earned, and there's absolute truth in that. Well, she didn't earn her trust, really. You need to be careful. She really, if you will, she threw him under the bus. Have you ever been thrown under the bus? I have, by the way. I have. And I know that I have. A couple of times. right in front of me. But they did it in privacy. I overheard a conversation once. Wasn't supposed to hear it. But when you walk through the church building, you can't help but, there's nobody in it, but there's a meeting, and you're walking through the building, and you hear a member talking to the elders and throwing you under the bus. You think, man, that's real good. I appreciate that. But anyway, she threw him under the bus. Next, learn from your mistakes. We'll talk a little bit about this next, but we need to all learn from our mistakes, and that does not mean, and I want to say this, that does not mean that we will not make that same mistake again. Hopefully we won't, but hopefully we learn from our mistakes. Where did this go wrong? And what that takes then is self-evaluation. And one of the things that we see in Samson that is really sad is that Samson never takes responsibility for his own actions. It's always somebody else and somebody else's fault. Somebody else is doing it. It's never his. And so we need to learn from those mistakes. And then next, another lesson, and I've got some others listed, but that's enough. Does anger help settle problems? No, not really. Be angry and sin not. Ephesians 4. Anything else? Any other lessons? Well, let's move on to the 15th chapter, excuse me. Samson is going to enact his revenge. Samson is going to show great violence in this chapter. There is great violence throughout this book. I mean, remember the tent peg that the lady used to nail the man's head to the ground? There's violence in this book. Samson's going to use great violence. He's going to use great revenge to defeat the Philistines. Time has passed. Exactly how much, we don't know. The time has passed from the 14th chapter to the 15th chapter because it says, after a while. After a while. In the time of the wheat harvest is about what we would say in our calendar about May. We'd say springtime, yes. It happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. Can you imagine? He's bringing a peace offering. What's he bringing? He's bringing a goat. Yeehaw, right? But that would have been the thing to have brought in that day and age. So, fellas, next time you want to make a peace offering with your wife, don't carry her roses, don't carry her candy, just carry her a goat. See how that goes over. I'll have a bed waiting for you at my house. You can sleep at my house that night. But nevertheless, huh? Yeah, well, maybe that. I think the goat will stay in there. Oh, we're making light of this. I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't, but I think you have to. He said, "Let me go in my wife, or in. Let me read correctly. Let me go into my wife, into her room, but her father would not permit him to go in." Now, she's going to be given, or already has been given, to somebody else. He's going to explain this. It seems as if, in his commentary, makes a statement. He said he thinks that Samson did not know this yet. But it would appear by the fact that since Samson in the 14th chapter didn't want to have anything to do with her, and she was given to his best man, that marriage itself was not consummated. And so consequently, then he doesn't understand this. He wants to go in, calls her his wife, wants to go into her room. And yes, there is the assumption that he wants to go see her for sexual favors, or for maybe consummate, because it hasn't been consummated ever. Get him to go in. Her father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. If you go back to the 16th verse, then Samson's wife wept on it, and she said, you only hate me. This is probably where the father got this. He said, I really thought you hated her. There, I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead. Now, there's just some interesting thoughts here. To think, first of all, that the father said, I thought you didn't like her. I thought you hated her. I mean, he uses the strongest of terms. I thought you hated her. And so I gave her to your friend. But what about her sister? Evidently, her father thought that Samson was still a prized catch. And maybe he was trying to make peace. Maybe he was just trying to substitute. But he said, it's terrible what he says. He says, is not her younger sister better than she? Well, that's an insult. Who does this remind you of in the Old Testament? Jacob, Rachel and Leah, Genesis 38. It does me, at least. It reminds me of that. But is not her younger sister better than she? Can you imagine if she's there close by? Thanks, Dad. That's the way you feel. Suzanne and I, only had one son. And those of you that were blessed with more than one child, I'm sure you treated them all equally. I have had conversations with mamas that literally did not, and tried to explain to them the importance of teaching of treating all of their children equally. My mother and father treated Carol and I equally. I only got more spankings than Carol did, but my mother said it's because I deserved them. I don't believe that, but but everything else was equal. There was nothing more towards her than towards me. We were treated equal. This tells you something here. But it also, if you think about the first part of the verse, where her father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her, he made an assumption. He made an assumption, and he did not evidently communicate with Samson. Now, we could say, well, Samson wasn't in the communicating spirit. He was mad, and remember, he went to Ashkelon, and yes. So there's a truth to that. But nevertheless, communication is important. It's important to husband and wife. It's important for parents to children, children to parents. It's important in church, elders to the membership to the elders, elders to deacons, elders to preacher, vice versa, of course. All of that's true. But communication is important. We see not far into the book of Genesis, Tower of Babel, and we find out really there the importance of communication and good communication. And communication must be honest. It must be sincere. It must be truthful. It's got to have all of these positive concepts, if you will. But it's got to take place. Assuming will always get you into trouble. But good communication will keep you out of trouble. And unfortunately, there was poor communication. Anything else before we move on? So Samson said to them, this time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines. Now, think about blameless. The Hebrew word literally means empty or clean. He's not taking responsibility. Samson takes no personal responsibility for anything that he does. He says, it's not me. I'm not guilty of anything regarding the Philistines. If I harmed them, I'm not guilty. He's going to act as judge and jury of the Philistines. He's not going to ask anybody to help him. He's not going to ask for any other decisions. He's going to make the decisions, but I'm not guilty of it. Then Samson went and caught 300 foxes. He took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, put a torch between each pair of tails. Does somebody's version have something other than foxes? Jackals. I got to reading a little bit more into that. Jackals make more sense than foxes as we think of foxes. Foxes as we think of foxes are loners. You know, you see one here and then one over there. Jackals ran in packs. And it would be a whole lot easier to gather 300 jackals than foxes as we think of them. And the Hebrew word allows for both, allows for it to be translated foxes as we think of them, or jackals. And yes, there is a tremendous difference. I understand that, but that's the possibility. So if your version has jackals, go with it. So, but anyway, he turned them tail to tail, put a torch between each pair of tails. See, there's fire again. And he set the torches on fire, and he let the foxes go through the standing grain of the Philistines. The unused grain, the unharvested grain, the standing grain of the Philistines, and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards. This is, of course, where the olives grow. This is where the wine would come from. And olive groves. Olive groves would be where you get your oil for your lamps and for cooking and for things like that. So he really, think about what he does. Samson is mad. He's mad at how it's all come about. He wanted this Philistine. He wanted this lady from Timnah. And remember, here's something to put in your thinking when you read this is to remember that this is, if you will, a time in which the Philistines were pretty much the heavy hand. And remember now that Samson, his father, was from the tribe of Dan. They were Danites. Remember that from the 13th chapter, verse 1. And so they're Israelites, and yet the Philistines are in charge. Now, as I was thinking about that today, I was thinking about this problem started long before Samson ever came to this world. This problem actually started in the book of Joshua when we studied it. Remember, one of the failures we said of Joshua was that he didn't run everybody out of the country that was a foe to Israel. That they pretty much squashed them and their reign of terror, but they allowed them to stay. Then through the book of Judges, what happens? Well, when the children of Israel had those good times and God was forgotten, these powers rose up. Now, especially in the tribe of Dan, the Philistines have arisen. And Samson is mad at the Philistines. And he turns really the argument of a family, what should have been between he and his wife and father-in-law, he turns it into a problem for the whole community. Because as he takes these foxes, these jackals, he ties their tails together, he puts fire in their tails, and they burn everything. They scorch the earth, if you will. He has made this an argument for everybody. I mean, these Philistines were probably saying, I didn't have a dog in that fight. Well, now all of a sudden they do. Anything else? Well, the Philistines said, who's done this? They answered, you can hear them, out talking amongst themselves. Well, Samson did it, son-in-law of the Timnite. Interesting. They call him son-in-law, don't they? I think that's interesting. I don't have an answer for it. Because he's taken his wife and given her to his companion. So see, they considered, and that's always the question. And that's the question that has been for years now and will probably be even one of those things, well, it has been contested in courts and will be contested in courts, is when is a marriage a marriage? When are you married? Are you married when you stand before preacher, justice of the peace, whoever, and say, I do. Are you married after the first conjugal act? When are you married? In United States history, slave times, you know when you were considered as a slave, when you were considered married? When you jumped over the broom. Go back and watch Roots. There are things in Roots that are not true. That's actually a truth historically. They had that as part of their ceremony. But the Philistines were considering Samson as son-in-law and also considering him as married to her. So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. So you see the death of what would be his first wife. Samson said to them, since you have done a thing like this, I will surely revenge on you, and after that I will cease. And so Samson begins his revenge. And I should have gotten further. That's where we're going to stop tonight. I will be gone next week. I will be on vacation. I'll actually be returning the next day from vacation. But we will start there on Samson's revenge. And because I want to spend time talking about revenge. Revenge is an ugly thing. You've probably had somebody, and hopefully you haven't, but you've had somebody do something to you that was vengeful for whatever reason. And I have. I mean, I'm speaking out of experience. I'm not speaking out of something that I don't know about. And it's not fun. And sadly for me, the individual that got vengeance on me for something I didn't do. I was an innocent party. There wasn't really a guilty party in it. It was something he concocted in his mind. And also he got some bad information from somebody. But revenge is not what we should do. Deuteronomy 32, God makes the statement. It's repeated a few times. We're probably more familiar with the Romans 12 passage. Vengeance is mine, I'll repay, says the Lord. And we let God have that vengeance. But anything else, we'll talk about that, not next week, but week after. Suzanne's taking me to Helen, Georgia to learn about Germans in Germany. And they have, y'all pray for us, October, they have an Oktoberfest. I'm not too excited about that. That's why we're trying to get out of town before the weekend, of their weekend. Just go for a few days. But anyway, all right, well, let's bow for a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day, for the many blessings, for the opportunity that we've had to come together to study your word. We're thankful for your word and what it means to us. We're thankful for the story of Samson. There's so many things in it that we point out that are the weaknesses and the flaws of this man. But we do realize that it's there for our learning, for our admonition. And we ask that we will take the things that we can learn from Samson, from his mistakes, and even from those things that are of good, and we will apply them to our lives so that we can be better servants of yours. We ask that you watch over us, that you bless us and keep us, and that you hold us as we hold to you. For this is our prayer in Christ's name, amen. See you Sunday, Lord willing, if not before. So I'll actually see you Friday night. Yeah, great. We'll see you Friday night, 7 o'clock. Come bring you singing voices. Y'all have a great week. Thank y'all.